All right, today I'm going to be showing you how to remove a carburetor on a Kawasaki Prairie 400. We've got the seat off of this model already. You're going to have to do that. And there's two 10mm bolts right here you're going to have to remove. And then two Phillips head screws up top here on this tank cover. This is the tank cover here. This is the fuel tank petcock here. Carburetor sits underneath here. Under the carburetor there, still attached onto the carburetor, you'll see your primer plug there. Just wanted to go over a couple of those things with you. First thing you want to do is shut your fuel off so you don't forget to do that. If you've got a fuel leak issue that'll continue to drain that fuel out of the bottom bowl of your carburetor, you can leave what fuel is left in that carburetor and that'll eventually just dump out as we're pulling this carburetor. First things first, we're going to go ahead and pull these two Phillips screws up top here. And they are a larger Phillips head. Get these removed, I'm going to turn the handlebars so you can see that a little bit better. Got a 10mm bolt over here we'll remove, and then this one's already been removed on this side, but it's the same thing. And we've got a fuel tank cap we're going to need to pull off here. And we can lift this cover off and put a fuel tank cap back on there so we don't get dirt and debris. These bolts here that you removed that were on that tank cover actually go all the way through that fuel tank. Now you've got that fuel tank completely ready to pull off of there. What you're going to want to do is remove this fuel petcock valve there. That takes a Phillips screw and it's all the way in here. Like to hold it in that off position because when you take and turn this, a lot of times it'll actually turn that fuel petcock when it's tight on there. So once we get that completely off there, take and pull that knob off. Now you've got a fuel line underneath of this fuel tank running from our petcock here, goes into our fuel tank. Now you can take this off one of two places here. You can take it off at the carburetor or you can take it off at the fuel tank. Sometimes like on this one here, it's a little bit easier to take that off on the actual carburetor itself. We're gonna pull that fuel line off right here at the actual fuel, at the actual carburetor. Now, I use side dikes. I obviously didn't squeeze down tight. The reason I did that is because you can a lot of times get it in between that fuel line and between that nipple there. You can take and actually just kind of pry it off. Now we've got that fuel tank detached from the actual carburetor there. Now we can just take and pull it back as you do this, but then you can just lift that fuel tank up and out of there. Now we've got our carburetor completely exposed there from the top. Okay, now we have our carburetor here. We've got our throttle cable that comes in here, goes underneath this black cover. Now we've got the top of the carburetor exposed here. We've got a clamp here that holds the carburetor onto the intake manifold. We can loosen up this clamp here, and then we've got a clamp right here that holds this boot from our airbox to our carburetor here. Also, we can loosen that up. Then you can take at this point and you can either remove the carburetor out of, I like to do the intake manifold first, and then you can pull it back because there's a little bit more flex in this boot here. There's no flex in that boot there. So we take and pull it back, and then do the same in the back and remove it out of this back boot here. Now you should have a fuel line on the bottom here, and this fuel line will run down, should run down below your engine case there. That's an overflow. If you've got fuel leaking, and check out my videos on how to clean these carburetors, that fuel will drain out that bottom overflow tube. The other thing that you'll have is some coolant lines, and I'll show you those a close up here in a second because I've got a lot of questions on guys asking about those. Up top here you have a vent line, and I've got a completely separate video on how these lines are supposed to be ran. So check that video out if you've got questions on these hoses. I'm just gonna do a quick overview here. Once you get that carburetor completely unhooked from from these boots here, I like to take then and remove this throttle cable cover. Now, on the top here, remove that. And then we've got our throttle cable that sits underneath this cover here. Throttle cable then runs down through here and it comes into that hook there. What I like to do is loosen this up, 10mm bolt, loosen that up, and then you've got a lot of free play here to go around. Take this off, slide this out of that butterfly there. Now the throttle cable's off. Turn it to this side here, and you've got a choke cable that runs into this side here, be the left-hand side of the four-wheeler, and that is a 12mm plastic nut there. And you want to make sure you've got the right size wrench on there, and make sure you've got a good hold on it before you start loosening that. These are, because they're plastic, very, very easy to round off or strip or cross thread. So you just want to be really careful. A lot of times once you break it free, a lot of times you can just use your hands to loosen that. Okay, once you've got it loosened, you can take and pull that out of there. Your plunger, along with your cap and your spring, are gonna come with that. You can set that aside. And then we're getting closer to being able to remove that carburetor. I'm gonna bring the camera over to the other side here so you can see some of these lines and show you where they go. Okay, you've got a coolant line that comes in here. This is gonna be the left-hand side of the carburetor. This coolant line goes through your filter here. Your hose goes down, and then it comes down and goes into that main coolant line. The other side of that line goes underneath of the carburetor. It runs back here, goes through this purge valve, and then goes up and will go into your thermostat housing here. That's attached to your cylinder head. So I guess it goes into your head there, and then will go through those coolant lines there, runs by your coolant sensor there. This is that drain line that I was talking about, the overflow hose that attaches to the bottom nipple on the carburetor. And then this is your fuel inlet here. It comes from your fuel tank. On the top side here, you've got a vent line. That's gonna be still the left-hand side of the carburetor. On the top here, a plastic nipple. And this is just a vent line here that attaches to your four-wheeler. So that is, just wanna make sure you've got in a clean spot so that it's not sitting there down resting on the engine or something. So that is the lines on the coolant lines and the fuel lines on this Prairie 400. Now to finish removing those. Okay, to remove those then, we've got a Phillips on the bottom here that we'll remove. Okay, we've got that Phillips head completely removed there. And we'll take and pull that clamp down. That clamp is off. That's what it looks like there. That holds that bottom plastic fitting onto that carburetor. I'm gonna loosen up that fitting. I'm just gonna kind of turn it back and forth and put a little bit of pressure, but it is a plastic fitting. So you're gonna be really careful you don't break it. Okay, you can just take and pull that fitting out then. You're gonna have some coolant leak in there. There's 2 rubber O-rings that seal that fitting up that goes into the bottom of that carburetor. It will eventually stop leaking coolant there, so just let it drip for a little bit. I'd put a rag underneath of it so we don't get coolant all over our four-wheeler and all over the lift there. But then at this point, you're ready to completely remove this carburetor off of the four-wheeler there. You've got your idle adjust. It's gonna kind of sit in that groove there, but you just have to unhook that. And there is the carburetor on a Kawasaki Prairie 400. Check my channel. I'll put a link below for the videos where we've gone through and rebuilt these. Also, I've shot a couple of videos on comparing the unbranded carburetors, the knockoff carburetors versus the genuine Kawasaki carburetors that are made by Kian. So make sure and check those videos out. I'll put that link below as well. Appreciate you guys watching. If you got questions or comments, make sure and leave those below. If this video has been helpful, make sure you subscribe and share our channel. Thanks a lot.